and children will rise up against parents. Happy Father's Day. Please be seated. Someone at the early service said, that was one of those gospel readings. I wish we had an intermission. Take a breath, carry on. But today, this week, we remember Juneteenth. The story of the Emancipation Proclamation is haunting. It's haunting because even though the proclamation went into effect in 1863, it took over 2 years to reach Galveston, Texas. It's a story about freedom becoming the law, having been proclaimed at the highest level. And yet, the truth was repressed, denied, and actively and intentionally ignored by those benefiting from slavery. It's also a story about being free, but not knowing it. So Jesus sends out his disciples this morning to bring good news to the people. That good news goes out to the world and also to us. Is it getting through to you? How good is the good news? Has it reached you? What level has it reached you at? Is there something keeping it at a distance from you right now? As privileged people, we often don't think about oppression because we're not oppressed, or we think that we are not oppressed. We think we have the option of engaging in justice or not engaging in justice because, I'm busy that weekend. But if the injustice is right there in the midst of your neighborhood or in your family, you don't have that option. But at the same time, I believe that we are often the source of our own oppression. There's a wonderful dismissal that I've heard about going forth, doing what is right, and not being a source of your own oppression. How do we oppress the message of freedom that's trying to reach towards us? The message of good news. What gets in the way of it? You are free. I am free. That is the ultimate law. It's the law of God. It is the highest law ever. And yet, are we tied up in anxiety about the future? Or hindered by regrets from the past? We have trouble forgiving. We can't let go of things. Our thoughts tie us up in so many ways because we try to think our way through into a promise. What we want. How can we then orchestrate our lives so that someday we will arrive? And, quite honestly, this is generally incredibly unsuccessful. To bring all of our thoughts and circumstances into bondage under mental formations just doesn't work. I'm going to look at it this way. I'm going to control it. I'm going to put it in some kind of theological bondage. And we even do this with God, putting God in a box. Rabbi Kushner said that he cares not if someone believes in God. It means nothing. It is such a mental place to be. I believe. He said what he is most concerned about is that the issue is whether we trust in God. Whether the journey from your mind down into your very soul brings you to a place where you're vulnerable. Here you go, God. But instead we say, I'll get that to you right after I take care of it. After I wrestle it to the ground. After I overthink it. After I do everything in my mental capacity to bring it under submission. Even the dollar bill. Isn't it interesting? It doesn't say, in God we believe. It says, in God we trust. What a wonderful thing to do when you hand money to some place. You know, if you did that and the person taking it and tried to pull it out of your hand and you're not letting it go, you know, what's wrong with this person? But every time we let something go, we would say, I trust in God. I trust. I am entrusting myself in this act of generosity. Paul writes that the church in Galatia, for freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Now, I believe that it's true that you can't offer what you don't have. If you don't feel free, and by free I mean that sense of letting go and trusting that things will be okay for you, how can you ever bring a sense of freedom to the world? How can you ever really let your actions be joyously committed to the freedom of others if you haven't been committed to your own freedom? How can you bring peace to the world if within you is a constant fight, a war of thoughts, of concerns? And so this oppressor is then identified as us. We are the ones keeping ourselves from absolute freedom, which is the law. We are in the 2-year period between the law, the highest land coming and being proclaimed and it arriving in our hearts. Now, what I like about Episcopalians is that there is a kind of, or seemingly a kind of humility about going out into the world and evangelizing people. I mean, this is what the story is about. Go forth. I'm sending you forth. And we're not known for that. I'll just be honest. I mean, I always like quoting the Gallup poll that said, that determined that the average Episcopalian invites someone to church once every 17 years. If you ever wonder where someone is or why there's an empty seat beside you, think of that. But we take pride in we don't want to impose religion on people. We don't want to be intrusive. We don't want to appear arrogant. We don't want to appear judgmental. And that's all well and good, but understanding the way evangelism actually works is what is important. It probably doesn't come through words or instructions or judgments. In fact, I can tell you it will not come through that. I have found that the more I sort out the war within myself, the bondage that I place upon myself, that people naturally ask me questions. How do you deal with this, Scott? When we express compassion for others, if that's our starting point, because we have compassion for ourselves and what we're dealing with, then people engage naturally. People that do not engage naturally, you let them go. Or you just say, not now. I guess this is not the time. And that's okay too. It comes down to vulnerability. How many of you enjoy being vulnerable? That's the key word right there, I think. Vulnerability. Vulnerability gets out of the head and moves down into the trust level of the soul. I just shared something with you. It's a difficult thing to open up, but you don't open up to everybody. You notice what Jesus says? Intuit. where the household is that's worthy for you to begin sharing your story. And if you feel that it will be disrespected, shake the dust off and leave. You don't put yourself into an abusive situation with your vulnerability. But you need to be vulnerable. I need to be vulnerable, and we need to find those places where we can really be vulnerable. And it's a scary prospect. This vulnerability we are called to is focused on God and those we love and trust. Ideally, this should be a place of vulnerability, a gathered people who can trust, who are worthy of the suffering that you may be feeling, the struggles that you go through, of walking with you in this place and time. When we look at our perceptions, I think a lot of times we will discover that our perceptions are the things that are making us sad, afraid, and anxious. Whatever thought you may have right now, maybe you're thinking of something, maybe you can remember the struggle that you're in. Consider whether that is a positive thought or something that's pulling you down, something that's distracting you, and ask yourself, how do I know that's true? We don't. We don't know that it's true. Our perceptions need to be released. And vulnerability is not an easy thing to embrace. A Jewish scholar once wrote that the Exodus happens every period in history, the journey away from bondage into freedom. It happens in every lifetime. It happens in every individual. It happens every day. You may have woken up this morning in Egypt. Your thoughts may make you feel like you're in bondage to something that's frightening you. It burdens you. And, I don't know about you, but sometimes I find myself in Egypt in the middle of the night. Your thoughts just keep running in circles, and you don't know what to do with them. And you wish they would kind of quiet down. But be patient with yourself, because this is the story. This is what spiritual growth is actually about. I love what Paul was saying this morning. Don't hide your sufferings. Boast in them. Boast in our sufferings, he says, knowing that sufferings produce endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint us because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit that has been given to us. It's a process. It's a practice, is what I like to say. Be patient with yourself. I have adopted this practice of turning on my iPhone. There's a great app for Plum Village, which is the mindfulness go-to app, and it has a meditation timer with a beautiful gong. You can set it for every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, for as long as you want. I found myself turning that on and just putting it back in my pocket. And I noticed something. Every time that gong happens, guess what? I'm in the future somewhere. I'm trying to solve a problem. I'm thinking about the past, maybe a regret. It's hard to stay present in the presence of God and in the promises of God. It takes practice. That's okay. Don't give up. I know I'm working on it. I think we're all, as true Episcopalians are, a work in progress. But as we work at that, as we trust the beautiful spiritual journey that we're called on, we will smile. We will feel deeper compassion for ourselves and others. And that moves us from Evangelism 101 to something much higher than that. I think the reason why the disciples were sent out with such a narrow mission field, did you notice that? Don't go to the Samaritans, don't go here, don't go there, just go to people we know. I think he was teaching them, evangelism 101. Let's give it a try. Let's see how it goes. But here's the other thing he did. Take nothing with you. In other words, the foundation for any kind of impact in the world is vulnerability, trust. And if we're not practicing it, then the good news is not there. It's just an idea. So yes, it's hard to practice, and it's hard to move forward in this spiritual journey. But we have people we can trust. We have people to walk with us, and most of all, God is with us. So I want you to think of something that could happen. Create a positive thought. Create such a positive thought in your mind, and then say, that's not positive enough. That's not extreme enough. Keep doing that until you laugh. Think of Sarah. Me? I love that she's pleasure. There's no pleasure anymore in my life. Think about Sarah. Think about Abraham. Think about this tremendous promise that seems way off the charts. Do that for yourself. Listen to God's intention for you. God's desire to express such kindness and gentleness and love in your life, and what that might look like. And just create something in your mind you might laugh at, but also know that God is with you. Some of the latest liturgies are wonderful, and there's one that transforms our known phrase, God be with you, and the response is, and it's retranslated to, God is with you. I love that, because our Western tendency is to put it off a little bit. God be with you. I'm here to tell you, God is with you. And also with me.